Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Happy Earth Day. What a beautiful, beautiful Earth Day. I mean, I've celebrated and participated in Earth Days during the rain. One time, actually, it was snowing, but we know what that's about, right? It's climate change. But today, we have an absolutely beautiful, gorgeous day, and we're in a beautiful, gorgeous space here at the Tishman Center to celebrate a day that really is about all of us and our contributions to designing our future, designing the Earth's future. So welcome. So I'm Michelle DePass, and I'm the Dean of the Milano School of International Affairs, Management, and Urban Policy. It's a mouthful. And I'm also the director of the Tishman Environment and Design Center, which is sponsoring this fantastic celebration. We affectionately call it TEDC here at the New School. So welcome. We hope that you come to as many events as you can today. And let's get started. So we're really excited to be with you as part of TEDC's inaugural Earth Day event, Earth Matters, Designing Our Future. Throughout the day, we're hosting panels and discussions on climate action, sustainability, spanning across the disciplines. This morning, we kicked off the day with a panel on sustainable fashion, and now we're at the special panel event, Food for Thought, Sustainable Food Systems. We have a great group of speakers today, and as you can see from today's range of programming, TEDC uses the power of interdisciplinary collaboration to confront the most important issue of our time, in my opinion, as a 2-decade into working on sustainability, climate change. Over the past year, we've convened faculty from the New School's Parsons, Lang, McInnis, NSPE, and NSSR to continue our mission of integrating bold design, policy, and social justice approaches to environmental issues. I'm excited to introduce one of TEDC's affiliated faculty this morning. Fabio Parasecoli is an associate professor and director of the Food Studies Initiative at the New School in New York City. He studied East Asian cultures and political science in Rome, Naples, and Beijing, where he specialized in contemporary Chinese history. After covering Middle and Far Eastern political issues, he worked for many years as the U.S. correspondent for Gambara Rosso, Italy's authoritative food and wine magazine. Among his publications, Bite Me, Food in Popular Culture, and Al Dente, A History of Food in Italy, he was general editor with Peter Scholars of a 6-volume cultural history of food. His current book projects are Unequal Territories, Food, Place, and Power in the Global Market and Feasting Our Eyes, Food, Film, Cultural Citizenship, and Identity in the U.S. Both are forthcoming in 2016, so get ready. You can pre-order it on Amazon. His more recent research focuses on food design and its systemic applications in sustainable tourism. Before I call Fabio up, I want to remind you all that this is a zero-waste event. So we have recycling and composting in the back, and we're going to walk the talk today and every day. So welcome, and Fabio.
Thank you. Thank you and good afternoon. So I'm going to share some of my more recent work and where it came from and how it's developing. As Michelle pointed out, I've worked for many years in food as a writer, as a journalist, and then I moved to academia doing research, but I'm still really interested to do work in the field, go to places, get to understand those places. So I started thinking about issues on tourism when I was writing my book on food and popular culture. But more specifically, after a couple of years, I found myself in a town in the state of Rio de Janeiro. The town is called Paraty. I don't know if any of you has been there. If you haven't, I strongly recommend that you go because it's fantastic. It's protected by UNESCO. It's still as it was in the 18th century, right on the beach. So a great place for a vacation. But I was there to work. And I was there because they launched an initiative called Sustainable Gastronomy. So basically what they wanted to do is integrate the local production in the offer for tourists. So the town is already a tourist town. But as you know, when tourists come in large numbers, things can get a little problematic. There is problem in space, problem of pressure on water, food, procurement of food. So there are many aspects connected with this problem. And in many places, unfortunately, food that is served in restaurants and resorts is not bought from the surrounding countryside. This is actually a huge problem, which is particularly visible, for instance, in the Caribbean. If you go to any big resort, I don't know, in the Dominican Republic or in Jamaica, most of the food consumed there is actually imported. There are sound reasons. I've spoken with many of managers in hotels and even cruise ships. Very often working with local farmers is complicated. The quantities are not what they need. The quality and kind of food that gets bought differs. So it is necessary to change the connection between these big tourist attractions and food. But going back to Parachi, what they did was precisely to try to connect the local restaurants with local producers. Not only immediately around the city, but also in the mountains behind the city. There is a beautiful tropical forest, rainforest, right behind. And many fishermen provide fresh fish, scallops. They have varieties of native scallops that are really, really interesting. So this was one of the elements in which they introduced an element of sustainability. But on top of that, they started thinking, okay, how can we change our energy consumption in the restaurants and in places where we buy and sell food? How can we change the way we serve food? One of the big events in the town is the Festival of Cachaça. Cachaça being this spirit that is distilled from sugarcane. It's a historical production there, and it's a huge, huge festival. Thousands of people come into the city. So at that point, the problem of maintaining a sustainable approach to feeding all that people is a real challenge. So this group I've started working, now it's 4 years ago. And that's how I started thinking. I was there to do other research on geographical indication, intellectual property, but their experience really, stuck with me. And so I started thinking about sustainable tourism, and in particular, how food can become an important part of sustainable tourism. Very often we think, of ecotourism, of places where the carbon footprint of the tourist is minimal, where nature is respected. But I think we have to develop, and that's the direction in which I'm going, also thinking in terms of systemic design. We also have to think in terms of social sustainability. What happens when lots of outsiders pour into a place? They change the social dynamic, the power structures of the place. Who takes more advantage of the additional income? Who gets cut out of the new sources of income? There needs to be, of course, economic sustainability. The system needs to work and create revenue. So that really depends on how the whole system is thought and developed. Environmental sustainability is extremely important. There are elsewhere interesting experiments. For instance, in Europe now, farmers get subsidies not to cultivate and rather to become the stewards of landscape. So the European Union is trying to introduce this idea of multifunctionality of agriculture. So agriculture is not there just to grow food, but is there to protect the environment, to maintain landscape, and to provide jobs and occupation to people that otherwise would move towards the cities. And in this sense, tourism can play an important role. We also need to keep in mind the fact that food is becoming more and more relevant for tourists, especially in the upper segments. People that go to a new place, they want to explore also the gastronomy. What are the local products? What do people eat? What are the traditions? That's becoming a big market. Actually, there are companies that organize gastronomic tours. So the gastronomic tour in Mexico, where maybe you can spend 2 days learning how to make tortillas and mole. Or I know, I'm from Italy. In Italy, this is a huge boon for tourism. I know people in Sicily that have renovated old farms or also noble homes to become centers for culinary tourism. But again, very often when I interact with these organizations, I always try to have them think in terms of different kinds of sustainabilities. The economic sustainability is important, environmental sustainability, but social sustainability, for me, it's a priority. And now in systemic food design, they're also introducing a new kind of sustainability, the sensory sustainability, which is, for instance, very important when you have big tourist events, like for the cachaça event I mentioned before. Sometimes it's a sensory overload to be in 10,000 drunk people, right? Everybody's drinking cachaça, so they're going to get drunk. But besides that, how do you make the experience not overwhelming? How do you make it pleasurable? I've had exchanges with somebody in Turin that worked on the sensory sustainability, besides other aspects, but sensory sustainability of Terra Madre. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the international movement Slow Food. Every 2 years, they have this big meeting called Salone del Gusto, and within this meeting, they have Terra Madre. It's a moment where farmers from all over the world get together, discuss, exchange ideas. So we're talking about thousands of people. And Slow Food and some food designers worked really hard to make this event, which can be considered tourist events from the point of view of the city. For the people coming to the event who are members in the movement, it's a different experience. But the city of Turin considered those tourist events. So how do you make them sustainable from the environmental point of view, from the sensory point of view, the economic point of view? This approach, connecting food to sustainable tourism, is quite new. It's developing, and I'm happy to be part of that. And as part of this reflection, next year, I will launch a class on precisely food and sustainable tourism. So I'm excited also to figure out pedagogical tools to have students work together on these ideas and make them very real. I mean, this is something that, for instance, upstate New York could really profit from, right? There is fantastic nature. There are very unique products that could be highlighted and not only marketed into the city, but become an attraction so that people from the cities go there and bring revenue. So it's all an issue of creating additional sources of revenue and then thinking how this revenue is distributed in a sustainable way, but as I said, not only environmentally. So this is something that is developing now. I'm very happy to be part of these reflections and these projects. One of the interesting things is you actually work on projects. There is little academic reflection on things. You do things, and then you figure out what you're doing somehow, and what worked and worked not, and what did not work. So I think I'll stop here, and I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ed Verdi, with whom I've worked several times, especially for the New School dining services. Basically, his role is leading the New School dining services. You realize that there have been lots of changes in the past couple of years. He's Senior Director of Business Operations here at the New School, and also looked at the procurement and strategic sourcing at the university. He grew up in upstate New York in a rural community, so he had a very clear idea of what fresh food could be and what it tasted like. He joined the new school in 2005 after worked in various positions in procurement, operation management, and project management in different jobs. But we're very happy to have him here. I've worked with him closely for a couple of years. It's been a great experience, and we're very happy of what's happening here at the new school in terms of food, and he will tell us more about that. I'm gonna... There you go.
Thank you, Fabio. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today to talk about the dining program and, in particular, our sustainability efforts. There's been a great evolution in dining services at the new school over the past several years, and I think just evidenced by the fact that the dining program was asked to participate in this event today is evidence of that evolution. Historically, at the new school up until a few years ago, and I think this is typical of higher education, and much like the hospitality industry referenced Fabio made earlier, institutional food service was volume-driven, all about quick service, a single efficient source, relatively little attention to the origin of food, the integrity of food, and certainly not with environmentalism as an equal weight to those factors. A few years ago, when I was asked to take over the food program, quite honestly, I had to figure out where the cafeterias were. They simply were not destinations, and I found them and immediately realized there was a lot of work to be done. So, you know, we've started with the obvious. First of all, the food has to be good. Elevating the food, things like utilizing less prepared, prepackaged products, and then doing some more innovative things. At the time, we were one of the first universities to eliminate the sale of bottled water, for example, which now is a pretty standard sustainability practice, but going back 7 or 8 years was not so mainstream. But overall, it just became evident that, you know, given the institution that we are, given the image we want to project in every aspect of the university experience, we need to be mission-driven, not volume-driven, not a conventional food service model. So one of the things we really wanted to do and still look eagerly to do, hopefully with all of you, is to build collaborations around the university. And I met with many different student groups, engaged faculty, and sort of gauging what the community expected and wanted, and building these strengths and alliances to form a vision of the program. And we've come a long way in doing that. We have a lot of, in fact, even in the staff of our dining operations, we employ a large number of student interns to give us feedback and monitor our own performance against established metrics and so on. But I think as much as all of those quantitative methods, one of the main things we wanted to do was build a sense of community around food. I think it's a real lost opportunity to not use food and its very visceral power to engage people and build community. And I think we're on our way to doing that. The new school dining really strives to be an integral part of the university experience. So, you know, one of the things being mission-driven that you just simply cannot ignore is, of course, our impact. And depending what source you look at, 25 to 29% of greenhouse emissions worldwide are attributed to the production and consumption of food. we wanted to recognize that and build a program that would, reflect the new school culture of engaging the community, challenging conventional wisdom, and be an integral part of addressing the climate challenge. Given that kind of a statistic, how could we do anything other than that? There was not really, still is not to a great extent, a prevalent or a well-recognized model for doing that. It's actually relatively new in institutional food service, though I like to not use that word to describe our program. But we focus on some main areas. Sourcing, of course, I think is one of the most obvious ones. How we purchase and balancing supply chain needs and impacts. Operations, we obviously need to meet customer needs while also reaching institutional goals and minimizing our impact as well. Educating, just communicating. We had, until the University Center opened, a relatively small constituency to even receive the messaging regarding food and to engage them with any kind of experience. And that's still a very iterative process. And we want to measure our performance in all those areas, the supply chain, how we're doing in impact, in consumption, in waste, all those various parameters. And changing, beyond changing our own program, what can we do to make positive changes in our community and up and down the supply chain and to all of our suppliers and constituents. To elaborate a little more, sourcing, we really strive to make a balanced approach in selecting our sources and getting the food to the new school. Balancing all kinds of factors. Geographic radius, I think, tends to be the obvious one. That migrates, of course, with seasonality. Ethical and sustainable, humane, of course, are constants in informing that. We have an absolute policy on natural, non-GMO, non-chemical, non-artificial. If you're eating with new school dining, those are given parameters about the integrity of your food. At a very tangible level, we engage with about 45 farmers from the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. As a matter of fact, some of them are with us today up in the cafeteria if you'd like to meet them later on in the afternoon. Hudson Valley Harvest, a consortium of small-scale farmers, seed to table, small fisheries. The impact on those communities when you talk to the farmers and their affiliates is just immense. We serve 24,000 meals a week at the new school. That's like 750,000 pounds of food a year. That's a huge impact potentially on the environment, a huge human impact, and we want to make sure we're directing our resources accordingly. The other part, of course, of the sourcing is we want to be completely transparent about that. We always try to publish where the origin of your food is. If you want to know, we can tell you what farm it came from. And we actually employ student interns to monitor that independently, so it's completely transparent. Operations, it's as I said, it's a huge volume, and that's why we need to be so strategic. We are actually serving food, for instance, in the main cafeteria here at about 250% of planned capacity. So we have a very good problem of figuring out how to serve the volume we do, but it makes our sourcing decisions and our operating decisions all the more important and impactful. One of the main things to achieve our goals and to make sure we maintain the integrity of the food, maintain financial stability and fair pricing, and just a positive experience and balanced experience overall is menu design. We have a very seasonal climate in New York. It's not as easy to have diversity in menu seasonally as it would be in some more temperate climates. So making sure that we take advantage of seasonal produce, utilizing, we like to say, head to tail, whether it's fish or beef or so on. It's fine for a fine dining restaurant to offer organic grass-fed Hudson Valley filet mignon, but they don't buy anything else. We make sure that we're buying the various cuts of meat so that our farmers have a market for all of it, not just premium cuts, again, lending to sustainability. All of our decisions about menu design are informed by what's seasonal, what's available, what will be the best decision for our supply chain, for our students, for our consumers. Very impactful parameter. And then some more workaday things, the inevitability of takeaway containers as used today. All of those are compostable, but we also serve on china and with real flatware for the majority of our service. Again, a much more sustainable approach than a typical higher ed or larger institution. Measuring, as I said, we want to be very data-driven, very transparent, and we employ students to do that calculation for us, of course, reflecting our operational decisions, and use them as advisors, as well as all the feedback. We get several hundred comment cards, menu requests, feedback. Hey, can you procure such and such a product? And that is something we strive to do. One of the great net benefits of our program is to, in fact, give access to the New York City market, specifically the New School, to small-scale purveyors that never had access to the market before. Institutional food service has always been based on aggregation and volume, and that's not who we are. We want to be able to bolster small farmers, small producers, small community, and measure those ripple effects. So some of the parameters we look at, of course, are the local and community-based, fair trade and labor practices, humane treatment of livestock, ecologically sound. We try to use certified organic, obviously no GMO, but there's not a completely robust metric for that. We do operate right now per the tenets of the Real Food Challenge, which is a student initiative, calculating on all those various parameters. But what it does not do is measure some of the nuances of our program. For instance, if you look strictly at geographic radius, but not at the efficiency of the distribution chain, and are using just this one boutique item to meet that radius, now you've exponentially probably increased the impact of that one item, when perhaps you can go 50 miles further, aggregate it with other dairy, for example. It's in the same delivery. You're giving more volume to that farmer. So one of our main goals in moving forward and measuring the university's impact is to hopefully collaborate with classes, professors, and so on to develop a more holistic model to really assess that impact. My dream is to actually be able, much like you can look at the calories of a plate you choose at a restaurant, to look at what the actual net carbon impact is based on where it came from, how it was distributed, how it was prepared, how it was delivered. No one does that. That's a huge project, but if there's any institution that's capable of developing such a metric, it's the New School. So that's something further that we'd love to have more conversations on with engaged people like yourselves. Educating is another part of our program, and we try to be very strategic about communicating the information of origins and impact. And when we are in fact questioned about offerings or made requests, we really try to engage with the students and explain why something is offered or not. We also train our employees on everything from the origin of the food and how and why it should be presented and prepared a certain way to how to best cut and trim a pepper. It's the amount of waste that's generated by proper operations can change by a huge amount based on level of execution. Supplier development and collaboration is one of our one of our biggest initiatives as well. We have worked with suppliers who may not have necessarily offered, who had the right model, may not be certified organic, may not have the kind of produce or at least the volume that we would require. And by making commitments and working with them to formulate supply paths, really come up with some great collaborations. And academic partnerships, curricular, I'm very honored to work with my colleagues here today. We've had some great projects together, conversations, really making those connections, because I think it's very important that something like dining, even though it's historically been seen as sort of a workaday service, actually becomes part of the New School experience and integral to its initiatives. And I'm very appreciative of the conversations and collaborations we've had toward that. And community engagement. We want to get the message out. We want to tell people what we're doing. It's very innovative. It's actually a model that has been emulated and is being emulated. It's sort of a showcase account. We've been published in a couple trade magazines, and we're getting a lot of visibility on that. We want to use that to change the traditional model, what the New School does: inspire debate, devise solutions, engineer policy. There's all kinds of leverage that we can get to advance the overall cause, not just for our own university, but for the impact, for regulatory, for various other parameters, that we have a perfect incubator situation here on such a great success. I want to share a quote with you. It's one of those emails that I print and keep on my wall when it's a really tough day. And this is from the leader of a farmer consortium in the Hudson Valley Harvest, and I'll read it. The leadership of the New School will have great impact and will be followed closely by others. Decisions like yours will change the food system and provide the foundation for a new, sustainable, healthier system. On behalf of all the farmers I work with, thank you for leading the way. And it's very rewarding to hear the individual stories. This is not just a man representing a business. This is a gentleman who has introduced me to farmers whose kids can now go to college, or who don't have to move away from the family farm to get gainful employment because we are buying enough to sustain that farm. This is mission driven. This is what we want to do at the New School, to have the broad effects in the parameter of food like we have in so many other areas. So again, thank you for including me in this today. I hope to be working with all of you.
Thank you, Ed. Let me introduce our next speaker, and there is also change. There we go. Rositsa Ilieva is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Tishman Environment and Design Center here at the New School. For instance, she teaches a class on planning sustainable cities. Her focus is in urban food systems and sustainable cities. She had her bachelor and master's in architecture, and then the PhD in spatial planning and urban development at the Politecnico University of Milano in Italy. Her Italian is flawless, and I can testify to that. She looks at the emerging urban food planning movement and the unexplored interface between food systems, sustainable development, and planning. We're very lucky to have her working with us, but in particular to have her here today to talk about the urban food planning revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio, so much for the fantastic introduction and for the compliments on my Italian. I really appreciate that. And thank you, of course, to all the organizers for including me on this fantastic panel on sustainable food systems on this so special day, which is today, Earth Day. So what I'm going to be talking about in the next 15 minutes or so is about a new emerging movement over the past 10 years. It has started emerging in North America, in particular, which is now known widely as the urban food planning movement. It's still perhaps more an evolution than revolution, evolution in terms of the impact that this movement has had, but revolution in terms of the scope and the visions and the objectives that it has ahead of it. And you can think of urban food planning as a movement as part of the broader and much more, a movement that has emerged already several decades ago about just and sustainable food systems in the United States, in Western Europe as well. So what urban food planning is about urban disciplines like urban planning, urban design, landscape architecture, entering into the field of sustainable food systems, trying to integrate a perspective on sustainable development that has the focus on food systems as the means and a new means to achieve and move towards the sustainable city goal, which hasn't been the case, as we know, for so long. And traditionally, planning emerges as a discipline that stands out to be a concern with the built environment, and it's something completely different from the rural environment in terms of disciplinary concern. So let me give you some background. What are some of the features of this emerging movement? Why is it all to be considered a movement? So if you look at the literature in the past 10 decades or so, planning magazines, journals, architecture, publications, urban design, special issues, journal special issues, you'd be amazed to see the incredible amount and increase in publications that we have witnessed over only 10 years. And this is not something that has been isolated or confined to academia, some kind of very unorthodox passion that urban scholars have started to have, but has gone hand in hand with an increasing interest in food and sustainable food systems at the urban level of policy. We now have, if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, this is the number of urban or regional food system strategies that have been released just in the past 10 years in the global north. So this is Western Europe, but also North America, some cities in Australia as well. So more than 30 strategies are now part of cities' agendas to move forward and toward sustainable development through just and sustainable food systems. And it's not strange or unusual then to look at this quote from Kevin Morgan, considering actually food planning as one of the most important social movements of the early 21st century in the global north. And this is strange, right? If you think of food, it has so long been confined as a matter of concern to the global south and developing economies. But this seems to be no more the case. And global north cities, developed economies, wealthy economies, now have begun to consider it as a really important matter of concern and even tool, if you wish, to transform the relationship between cities, food systems, and the rural environment. So if you look a little bit closer at those strategies, what you'd find is basically the realization of mayors worldwide, and this is what Verdi touched on, that food has this visceral power of convening people. The convening power of food is so strong that you cannot simply ignore it anymore at the political level. So New York, if you look at the strategy of New York wants to be a leader in food system change. Bristol sees itself as the leader in the creation of a truly resilient food system. or Toronto believes that it's poised to lead the way towards sustainable food systems. And this has, of course, had an important impact on professions traditionally dealing exclusively with the urban built environment, shunning away from the rural, from food systems. Here on this timeline, you can really trace how in the past 10 years, so if in 2000 we were getting publications such as this from Cami Pothukuchi and Jerry Kaufman on the food system as a stranger to the planning field, strangely, unlike other systems, water, transportation, housing, green systems that have been so that serve so basic needs in cities, food has been ignored. Food hasn't been really part of the urban planning domain, and has been neglected as part and as integral part of our lives and sustainability in cities. This gradually has started at least being acknowledged as a puzzling omission in the planning field, and now we have on both sides of the Atlantic working groups in planning organizations, as the American Planning Association now has a working group on food systems. The ASAP, which is the European Association of Schools of Planning, does have a sustainable food planning group. We do have also an edited volume on sustainable food planning, pulling together contributions from the domain of urban design, architecture, rural sociology, and food-minded urban planners. And even in 2010, if you look at the World Planning Day topic, was really how can we integrate food systems in planning practices? So if we have to think where are we now, of course we are far from a situation when food is completely a stranger to the planning field, which was the case in around the turn of the century. But we are not yet there in terms of integrating food as a separate department in our city governments, as are transportation, environmental protection, land use, public health. So where are we standing now as we are beginning to consider food as such a primary issue at the urban level? We are in a situation where urban planning and food systems are beginning to overlap. There are some crossovers, some policy changes, as we know in New York City as well. For example, the FRESH program using zoning incentives to encourage more fresh food supermarkets in some underserved areas. And many innovations are emerging. So the question is, how can we learn from these niche innovations happening sometimes at the very grassroots level at cities in a way that they help us transition the whole food system. So this is the framework I like to use in my research, which is transition theories. And what transition theories tell us is how massive, complex, incredibly large systems, socio-technical systems as transportation, again, housing, energy systems, supply systems, can transition in a context where we have an alignment of innovations and very strong large-scale landscape pressures, as we are experiencing now, climate change, peak oil, New York City obesity epidemics. These are pressures exerting influence on the dominant regime, including the urban planning regime. So what kinds of innovation we can look at and learn from? There are conceptual, analytical, design and organizational changes that we are experiencing in cities. As to conceptual, planners are now beginning to realize that food actually can be an urban development tool. It can be mapped out as an urban infrastructure for health and social justice, but it can also be seen as a neighborhood amenity, and this is a proposal in the Amsterdam metropolitan area, to be considered as equally important neighborhood amenity as green spaces, schools, libraries, local food systems can provide essential urban services beyond health. Think about the many urban agriculture projects across New York City and the kind of services and benefits they provide for a community as other traditionally considered services by urban planners. And we do have, at the disciplinary level, emerging frameworks and proposals how a food-sensitive planning or urban design can look like. Agricultural urbanism, or food-sensitive planning and urban design. Food urbanism, this is a Swiss project in Switzerland. But well, now that we know that planners are starting to consider food as a worthwhile topic to integrate in their practice, this is not enough. We need to relearn what the city is. We need to relearn how to look at the city through a food system lens if you want to transform the food system through local action at the urban level. So of course this could be a historical exercise, and we can find out how, for example, with the globalization of the food system has gone hand in hand with our sprawling urban patterns and literally conquering the countryside once we have been freed from the need to preserve it. But also at the present day situation, we can learn how even in a first world country, even in one of the wealthiest cities in the world, there are areas that are excluded from the wealthiness of our and the abundance of our food system. So the so-called food deserts, I'm sure many of you have heard about these spaces in cities like New York, but also many other cities in Western Europe, where they're largely underserved in terms of healthy, affordable, fresh, regional food produce. So we can see also how this overlaps. It's not just a matter of access, but this overlaps, seeing the city through a food system lens, with some of the highest degrees of obesity or diabetes epidemics. But it can also, this is about problems, right? But it can also reveal us, and this is a study on urban agriculture from Columbia University, what are the potentials? How we can use open space, public space in cities to transform the urban food systems. Or vacant land, institutional kitchens can be an important asset for cities to rethink how they relate to the food system. It is not just the urban scale, it's not just the neighborhood scale that planners and cities can think of food, it's also the regional one. And here in New York, the term food shed was actually coined in the 1920s. And now we are using this catchment area to study, to understand better where our food comes from. What about design? We know that there are many problems now that we can find through a food system lens in cities, but how can we transform the current situation? There is an abundance of proposals and projects. We can interconnect open city space. We can rethink what an urban expansion or new urban district, as in Almere, nearby Amsterdam, looks like. We can also connect sites of historical heritage, as this is one of ambition of the city of Milan, and really connect to what Fabio was touching on, culinary tourism and sustainable gastronomy. So this is a network of rural buildings in Milan. Urban development can be rethought from many perspectives, the business-driven, statutory-driven, so including in master plans, or even community-driven. And this is also another question. How can we use the potential that opens up after big events as World Expos, as now is ongoing an Expo on Food in Milan, or the one that is going to be held by Almere in the Netherlands in 2022, to really radically rethink how our cities can grow, how urban space can relate to more sustainable food system patterns. We do have some more comprehensive, rather than a collection of projects, comprehensive efforts to plan for the food systems, but there are really few documents that are legally binding. Many of them are more in the spirit of recommendations, suggestions. Some policies at the local level, I mentioned the New York City Fresh program using zoning code amendments, or the Boston or Urban Agriculture Overlay District, trying to rethink how we regulate land in the city. But of course, none of these innovations, neither conceptual, changing our minds about the food system or seeing how the food system looks like in the city, or proposing solutions for designing, can be sustainable, can happen. An urban food planning practice cannot happen if there is no organizational capacity, and if we don't manage to find a space, we can start to rethink the food system as professionals, designers, architects, and planners. What these spaces might look like? Well, food policy councils are one space that has emerged very strongly in the United States. There are over 100 food policy councils now, which are considered as a de facto food system planning agencies. The problem with food policy councils is they're extremely underfunded, understaffed, and oftentimes outside of government. So what could be a space, a stable space, that we can find and provide for these practices to happen? There are some coalitions going on an international level as the Sustainable Food Cities Network in the UK, so cities that have devised food system strategies come together. And of course, who the food system planner is. Again, it's still a very heterogeneous, fragmented movement where urban planners are part of the leading figures, but are not only urban planners. Every professional working with the city and the built environment, developing a sensitivity about sustainable food system, is now coming together and thinking of how community of urban food planning, community of practice can look like. So, bottom line, we do know that there are some niches already at the conceptual level. There are working groups and the APA and ASAP, so planners are coming together, and there is something that is called urban food planning. We can recognize it now. Some novelties are aligning in the ways we can see cities, so food shed analysis and assessments, procurement strategies assessment, urban agriculture projects mapping, food deserts mapping. But we are still very much fragmented and pointing towards different directions about how we can really transform the food system. What could be the strategies, at different scales, different professionals can embark on to transform the food system. And finally, there are some alignments in agreement how we can organize to transform the food system, though we really need to understand how these initiatives can be more durable in time. How we can come together and really make the most of this convening power that food has. So urban food planning is an emerging movement, very exciting movement, and certainly is a journey that has just begun. And I think that places that have the power to convene very many original thinkers out of the box, able to think of out of the box solutions, as the new school is, and can really make the difference and take this movement to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Rositsa. We go to the last speakers. There we go. So Anna Marandi and Maeve McInnis, they are both in the graduate program in environmental policy and sustainability management. Anna studied comparative literature, then she worked in media, and actually she was the associate producer in the sports department at HBO. And then she worked as a location scouting in New York City. And recently she's come back to her roots, and so she's specializing in food systems and agriculture here in the school in Milano. And she actually worked as research assistant for Nevin Cohen, who now is at CUNY, and for Rositsa. Maeve McInnis, she was the former president of Sustainable Cities Club, and now she's working on her thesis project in the mayor's office of food policy, looking at the city's agency's local procurement practices. She has experience in the food business. Actually, she worked for the New York restaurateur Keith McNally at Balthazar, Minetta Tavern, etc. And she's also our column and rock in food studies. She's our graduate assistant. She does an amazing job at that. Anna and Maeve.
Oh dear, can you see me? I didn't anticipate that.
I need a box for you.
Need a box. Just kidding. So thank you, Ted C., for inviting us on this panel. It's really glad to be a part of that. And thank you so much to the SAFC and the USS for funding our trip. So a group of us from the Sustainable Cities Club went to Boston on March 28th and 29th for the Just Food conference. And in agreement for supporting us, we agreed to come back and report to the school what we learned. So when I came back, I was thinking about all these different things, like, gosh, why are there's so many angry small farmers at the panel, and why are they fighting with the vegetarians? And oh my God, it's crazy, and there were so many interesting things, but I said, let me try and find one theme that could sort of lock everything together, bring everything, make it relative. Somebody asked me, who did you go with? I said, there was 8 of us, all women. Huh. All women. Oh, I didn't even realize it. I didn't even think about it. And so I started thinking about that theme about women and mothers, and then I realized so many of the panels I went to really addressed or touched on some of these issues. So that's what I decided to bring back to the new school and talk about. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is mothers and marketing. I'm going to get into a little bit about, bear with me, poultry labor, animal mothers, and then I'm going to kind of rally you all and leave you on an up note and talk a little bit about mothers who organize. So one of the panels I went to was a gentleman named, I'm going to butcher his name, Sriram Madhusudanan. He's with StopCorporateAbuse.org. And he did a really interesting talk about marketing towards mothers, towards children, how McDonald's is actually the largest distributor of toys. Kind of some disturbing things. They really are going after children's preference for sugar. So who's paying for all this? Of course, mom. Mom is tired. She doesn't want to go and do the research to find out what's cheap or healthy. It's like McDonald's is there, it's easy. So there's a lot of targeting. That's pretty obvious stuff, I think. But what's not so obvious is that, and I'll come back to this a little bit at the end, is that women and mothers are organizing and fighting back, and it's actually had a really positive effect. I'll come back to that at the end. So the second thing I wanted to discuss, and it was a little bit disturbing, but it was a panel on poultry workers, and I really didn't know much about this. I've read, Upton Sinclair. I've read a little bit about, this industry. I know it's harmful. I didn't know that it is mostly women working there, mostly undocumented. There are prisoners working there. It's a very, let's say that it's sort of a wage trap kind of industry. So you have Tyson and Purdue and all these producers, and what they do is they give maybe $1 more to their plant workers than the industry down the street in these small towns, mostly in the South, mostly in the Southeast. So these women find themselves in a wage trap where they'll get paid $8 if they go work at this poultry plant in pretty horrible conditions, which I'll just breeze over because it's unappetizing. But, or, $7 at the place down the street, Walmart or whatnot. So they get paid a little more, but the work is pretty horrible. It's very cold, it's slippery. They don't get a chance to move. They're basically in the same spot, doing the same thing for 4 hours at a time. A lot of the people, they're mothers. A lot of them are pregnant. At the end of the panel, so it was actually Oxfam. I should have said that. Oxfam is working on this issue. At the end of the panel, they had a worker there from North Carolina who was undocumented. She had sort of snuck up there for a few days to be a part of it. And they said, well, what would you like to see changed here? And, my policy mind, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm waiting for this, really deep moment. And she says, I just want to see the line move a little slower. That's it. That's it. So simple. The line meaning the chicken line. They have to cut. 4 hours. Anyways, it's kind of upsetting. Anyways, so that was a really profound moment for me in her simplicity that really stuck with me. So the third thing that I thought about was a panel I went to with Aisha Akhtar. She's a neurologist. And she did a talk on like food and animals and how we're not separated. We're all together in this. And it made me kind of think about, well, animals are mothers as well. And it's a bit obvious, but we don't really think about it in those terms, that the hens that are giving us our eggs, the cows that are giving us our milk, those are all mothers. So really there's a strong connection to females in the food industry. And so this is all sort of coming to me, formulating in my brain as I'm thinking about these things. So that also is another sort of very difficult topic to digest, I understand. And a lot of these mothers, they're animals, but they are mothers. They're forced to be in situations that they don't ask to be in. They're asked to produce on demand. They're confined. They are, essentially enslaved. So here we have a lot of women suffering at the hands of this food movement. So I just want to leave you on a really positive note that there are things that are being done, and that women, if you look around, a lot of this room is women. So food and women, it's always been intertwined. And I don't think that this is necessarily a negative stereotype. I think we can use this to our advantage. So a lot of women have done this, and along the decades, women have been especially mothers, have been a powerful force in advocating, in organizing. In the 1960s, they were the ones who organized, and they were the ones who got laws passed to reduce emissions in cars. And that was a really interesting and important movement that I actually learned about in Ana Baptista's class. Thank you, Ana. So women have been a really powerful force, and I think that we shouldn't ignore them, and we should support them. And women and mothers who fought against McDonald's, they did a really good job. There was a big Facebook campaign where McDonald's was trying to campaign to market their cheeseburgers, and they said, put a bag over your head and then take a photo and post it on Facebook. It's like so demeaning, So women fought against it. They did a whole campaign called Mom's Not Lovin' It. So that was pretty cool. And it was a big backlash. And actually, I don't know if it was in direct relation to that, but the McDonald's stock did go down. So that's a good sign. In any case, I just wanted to remind you that when you shop, you are voting with your dollars. So be conscious of, the products you buy. Yes, we live in a democracy, but, with Congress at a standstill, I think that our most powerful move is with our dollars. I think for journalists, activists, writers, bloggers, take advantage of this force that is sort of forgotten, and, take advantage of mothers as an organizing tool. They are powerful. A lot of people work from home, and they have time. They're interested. They want to give their best to their families and their children. So don't overlook them as a force to be reckoned with. So I'm going to leave you with Maeve McInnis, and she's going to talk about her impression of the food panel as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you everyone who organized this. I know it takes a lot to organize events, so thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to kind of take a step back and kind of look at the macro level. You know, there's two keynote speeches that really struck a chord with me and kind of like all the research that I've been doing. The first one was a keynote speech by Molly Anderson, who is at the College of the Atlantic. A few years back, she did an article on rights-based food system. So moving away from a food system that sees food as a commodity, as a profit margin, and looking at taking the conversation, taking advantage of the mothers that Anna was talking about, the school system, that Ed was talking about, and changing that conversation that we're having about people's right to food. It is a human right. It is recognized within the UN as a human right. So how do we move that conversation to a place where we don't have to think about food deserts in cities because they just don't exist anymore? How do we change the conversation so that everybody, no matter who they are, working in hopefully better conditions than the food processors, but that they have the food that they need because it just is there for them. And Francis Moore Lepay, one of the other keynote speakers, gave the example of a Brazilian city, Belo Horizonte, which some of you may have heard of. And the mayor, when he ran for office, he ran, basically telling everyone that if you are not happy with what I'm doing, I'm failing at my job. And a big part of what he determined his job to be was to make sure that there was food on everyone's plate. And a few of the initiatives that he started in that city to move away from a commoditized food system and towards a rights-based food system was to introduce the People's Restaurant, which was a place where anyone could go and eat a meal free of charge. It was seen as a community gathering space and not as, there was no stigmatization of or negative perception of what this restaurant was, but people saw it as a place to come and hang out and get really great food. Another initiative that he put in place was working with supermarkets, especially in low-income areas, and asking them to have staple foods such as grains and beans and fresh vegetables, all of your staple goods, at a price point that the people in those neighborhoods could afford. And then giving, obviously, every other item in the store could be priced at the market value, but enabling people and empowering them to be able to purchase the fresh food that they need and rely on. There are several other examples, expanding, the farmers markets and creating that communication between, what the farmers need to survive and getting access to the city, sort of along the lines of what Rositsa is talking about, this urban-rural connection. And then we watched a video by Olivier de Schutter, who is the special rapporteur on the right to food at the UN. And his speech was very much, telling the US that we need to have a national food policy, that the US is still seen as an example of a precedent setter, and kind of sets the norm for the global conversation, and for the US to really get behind having, this rights-based national food policy to help that conversation move further. I was going to talk a bit more about the feminization of the food movement, but I think Anna said it pretty well, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes for a Q&A. I think the microphone is for the audience. Please make sure to speak into the microphone so the questions will be audible in the video, and you can ask questions to any of the panelists. Katayun?
Hello, is it on? Can you hear
Yes.
me? Fabio, thank you so much for putting this together. This was really
Oh, no, I didn't.
interesting. Everyone who put it together, but I was particularly interested in some of Ed's comments. So I was wondering if I could ask some questions about the criteria that you choose besides local in choosing the foods that we serve here. So for instance, a couple of different times you said, of course, non-GMO. And I am not necessarily pro-GMO, but I think it's important to have a critical debate about our choices of criteria. So when you say non-GMO, are those local farmers still sprinkling bacteria with Bt toxin as opposed to engineering the plants with Bt? Because in fact, that actually contributes more toxin to the runoff in agricultural runoff. So I think one of the things that I think is very important for students here to think about is, of course, we use criteria and we use evidence to make our choices, but it would be interesting to me to know the depth at which we are critical about those choices. So I'm curious about that, because to sort of say nonchalantly, of course, non-GMO. And the other reason why I'm bringing up the GMO issue is because there are many examples of new ways of growing food, some of which require genetic modification that allow for drought-resistant plants, for instance, or more highly nutritious foods. And I'm curious about that as well. And then the third piece I was really interested in is how many of the foods do we serve here containing palm oil, which is one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions worldwide because of the logging and the peat that the palm has to grow in. So thanks.
Thank you. Yes, we do look at all of those parameters. The metrics I was speaking of, Real Food Challenge, for example, compared to a more robust methodology that we employ and that we'd like to formalize in a model, we actually do visit the farms to look at those practices. And GMO, I think, is one of those areas where there are many factors that tend to be very complex, and to some extent, even the experts say we don't really know what we don't know. So we err on the side of caution, as you said, in the production as well as GMO product per se. The other criteria beyond geographic radius is sustainable practices, humane treatment, non-caged animals, humane treatment, and employee treatment as well. So it's that look at all of the parameters of the supplier. I'm sorry, would you repeat your final question? The palm oil. Yes, we use only olive oil and grapeseed oil. And there are ingredients such as hydrogenated oils, palm oils that we will not buy. I mean, we don't buy a lot of prepared product, but nothing containing those as well. And that sort of hits on some of the points that I made earlier so far as engaging with students to explain why something is offered or non-offered. For example, many people will eat vegetarian or vegan out of principle supporting the environment. However, if you are demanding a quote-unquote vegan cheese that's made from palm oil, you're contributing to deforestation, so you sort of defeated your original purpose. So that, speaking to the point of educating and engaging, those are the kind of messages we want to get out and collaborate with the community on.
Thank you. Next question.
Mine is for Anna and Maeve. I'm not familiar with the Sustainable Cities Club, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your scope and objectives.
Good question. So Maeve was the former president, so she can speak a little bit about maybe the initiatives that they did in the last couple years. I think this year, we just took over the organizing committee a few months ago, and a lot of the things we're trying to do are we're approached by other people sometimes about projects, and so we'll try to get together, like for example, today, the I Love New York Water initiative. So we took that, and now we're going to try to grow that into a bigger initiative to get more like water refilling stations in the school. We go on a lot of field trips. Last week we went to the digester eggs in Watertown Creek. I organized the trip to go to Boston. We got it all paid for. So I think it's like, you know, it just depends what the club members are really interested in, and we're trying this year to do a lot more sort of cross departmental work and cross clubs and so like to not have it so separated and kind of work together with other departments and get as many people involved as possible. So that's sort of our goal, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, so is this on? Can you hear me? In February, we put on a conference, and we brought business leaders that were dealing with sustainability issues here to the new school for a 1.5-day conference, looking at, you know, what are the daily challenges that they face, what choices do they have to make, and under what conditions, kind of to give us students an idea of what it's like, you know, working in these situations, facing hard decisions on a daily basis. Like, you know, Ed and his team have done great work in creating a sustainable food system for the new school. So we're trying to look at some other businesses that are doing that. The club on a whole is really, you know, it's a student-led club, and we generally have meetings, and we have led several projects at the new school. In the past, you know, it was started a few years ago by an alum of our program, where there was a student that wanted to get rid of one-use plastic bags in an area in Greenpoint, and he rallied, you know, a bunch of students at the school to work on this project, and I think he's actually still working on it. I believe there was a group that did kind of a waste stream project at the school as well, to, you know, the signs that you see for compost and recyclables and stuff like that. So the students helped put that together as well. So it's really a space for students who have a project to kind of come together and work on it and find other people that are interested in these same problems and finding solutions.
We have time maybe for one or two more questions. Oh, the gentleman.
Thank you for the panel. The question is for Ed. As a part-time faculty member here and vegan, I appreciate the efforts you guys have made to include a lot of vegan options, and I just wanted to find out what other things are in the line and what other things are planned in that direction. And also just to mention that there is a great vegan cheese that doesn't have palm oil. That'd be great on the pizza.
Great.
What's it called? Let everybody know.
Yes, yes. Please.
Daya.
We intend to increase our vegan and vegetarian offerings. Of course, there's a finite amount of vegetarian or vegan proteins, and we actually serve them all. One of the things that's our initiatives operationally is to increase the diversity, not only in vegan and vegetarian offerings, to be even more broad and authentic in various treatments. We have increased the breadth of our culinary staff, and one of our initiatives over the summer in particular is to look at completely different menu cycles with an eye to diversity, spice palettes, and so on, to sort of reimaged in very creative ways in some of these staples of not only traditional proteins, but vegan and vegetarian as well.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I would like to remind you that there are events all days. At 2 p.m., we have Cities Under Siege, Climate Change Resilience Panel in the auditorium here. And at 6, we would have TED C Talks, Earth Matters. And also, please check the Dome of Memory in the UC lobby right at the entrance. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.